Yeah, the fact that we depend on that oil is a major problem. But regarding the bin Laden family leaving Washington the day after 9/11, I happen to know that the bin Laden family and the Bush family have been close friends and associates for a very long time, business associates. But of course the bin Laden family were just about as horrified as anyone else over what their son had done.
Okay, just a quick question. In terms of atheist activists and secular activists prioritizing their time and resources, what are your thoughts on the best balance between political lobbying on the one hand and taking court cases such as the Italian crucifix case on European human rights law?
I think both are absolutely necessary. I think lobbying politicians, making politicians aware of what's going on, producing reports, doing this kind of activity is absolutely vital. And if we can bring cases to court, we should do that. It's tedious, it's expensive, it's time-consuming. But when it happens, it works. On a somewhat slightly subject, but actually quite germane to this, the United Kingdom, some years ago, passed an equality law which ran counter to the European Charter on Human Rights and Fundamental Freedoms. And they got a judgment from the European Court of Human Rights saying that that law was illegal and had to be overturned. It was because it allowed companies and religious groups to discriminate against non-believers. However, the government attempted to rectify that and earlier this year, introduced new equality legislation in the United Kingdom. And that particular clause had been included quite quietly. However, the 26 bishops of the Church of England saw this and decided that that wasn't good enough. They wanted to be able to continue to discriminate on the grounds of religion. Now, European legislation allows you to say, well, I'm allowed to insist that someone who is in the role of a priest in my church has to be a member of this faith community, has to be a Christian, for example. But you're not allowed to say that the floor cleaner has to be a Christian and can be vetted on that basis. However, the Church of England bishops got that clause overturned in the House of Lords. So the British government has now passed new equality legislation, which is still at variance with European law. And the National Secular Society will be taking that up. So court cases are important, but you also got to do campaigning. There's a campaign in Britain at the moment called One Law for All, which has just produced a report, I think today, on Sharia law and Sharia courts in the United Kingdom. Now that's an authoritative survey of the use of Muslim arbitration tribunals and Sharia courts in the UK, which are being widely used in the Muslim community, but which are strongly discriminatory against women and children. And that report will now go to all members of Parliament, just to advise them and explain to them that there is a problem here, in the hope that we can get legislation, as we succeeded in doing in Ontario, in Canada, to overturn the use of those courts. So you need to do both. You've got to campaign, you've got to use every method you can to try to win the argument.
Hello, my name is Jesper Christensen. I'm here to address the thing about the apparent symbiosis between the hardliners on both sides. And it is also in relation to some of the recent developments in discrimination laws and against religion and race in the UN, where it seems to be there's a kind of a leftist movement sort of pushing a multiculturalist agenda, which is to mean not that we just have to accept that there are different cultures, but we actually have to give special privileges to everybody who is from a minority. And one of the things I'm a little bit afraid of is seeing those things unfold, because apparently it seems to restrict the freedom of expression at the same time. So I was just wondering if you have any comments on that subtle thing going on, because we wouldn't really want to have one sort of kind of hardline agenda ingrained in the UN system.
Yeah. There are 2 or 3 fronts to this particular campaign. I would almost describe it as a war in the UN. For the last 10 years, the Human Rights Council, or the Commission before that, has been passing resolutions aimed at restricting freedom of expression where that freedom of expression can be seen as attacking a religion. They want to protect religions, religious symbols, religious ideas per se, whereas the Western liberal democracies say, no, no, human rights is about the rights of the individual, not the rights of ideas, the rights of opinions. Nevertheless, in the old Human Rights Commission and now in the Human Rights Council, the organization of the Islamic Conference and its allies, which include all the non-aligned movement, are in the majority. They have about a 2-to-1 majority in the council. And they are able, year after year, to pass resolutions combating defamation of religion. And those resolutions then go to the UN General Assembly in December each year and are also passed by a typical 2-to-1 majority. And those are highly negative, viewed from the perspective of individual human rights. So yes, there is a very, very strong move within the UN to further restrict freedom of expression. And just yesterday, in fact, I think they voted on it yesterday afternoon, the Human Rights Council passed a resolution which has changed the mandate of the expert, the Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Religion or Belief, specifically to report on cases of Islamophobia. So in other words, they have done this year to the mandate of the Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Religion and Belief what they did 2 years ago to the mandate of the Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Expression, which is turn him from a guardian of the freedom into someone who is charged with policing so-called abuse of that freedom. So they are winning hands down on their attempts to restrict not only freedom of expression, but it's negative for freedom of religion or belief as well. Because it's not about giving minorities protection. In the Muslim states, it's about protecting the majority from any criticism at all. And it's quite interesting that while the Islamic states in the last 2 weeks in Geneva have been focusing on defamation of religion, they have completely ignored the violence in Kyrgyzstan. They completely ignored, there was no mention made whatsoever of the massacre of the Ahmadis in Lahore. It seems they have a completely free rein to do what they like in their countries, but are only attacking our freedoms in the West. And boy, that's what we're fighting.
My name is Ole Gerstrom. I think also when we look at the trouble we have with Islam, we have to look into high politics. Like we know that Saudi Arabia was an invention made by the British in 1932 when they took this Mr. Ibn Saud and made him into a king, probably because the British wanted to explore oil in the Middle East and they wanted to own the Middle East. It looks like it. One point of the high powers at work. The other day I went to a lecture by a former Pakistani general who complained about this. You talked about the Pakistani, the CIA training the Taliban, right? And he complained bitterly about how the Americans in those years from 1979 to 1989 and later, they flew in jihadists from all over the world to come to Pakistan to get trained as terrorists. And when the Soviets had been kicked out, they were sitting there, he said, 20,000 highly trained terrorists. And they continued around the world, went to Bosnia, went to Chechnya, and continued. The responsibility of the CIA, I would say. This work we are doing has to go also be directed towards high politics. Also here in this little kingdom of Denmark, recently you spoke about here about we should forbid religious hatred in this fight. Well, we certainly have legislation here in Denmark about religious hatred. Right now, a member of parliament is being dragged into court for criticizing Islam. Whereas as we saw, we were sitting here in Denmark and looking when we had the big cartoon crisis. We saw in London, Islamists with big signs, kill the infidels, etc., and nothing happened whatsoever. There is something very wrong in high politics in this matter. You agree?
Thank you, yes. From colleagues of ours in Pakistan, we knew several years ago that way, way beyond the time when Russia had left Afghanistan, that the CIA had reached an agreement with the Taliban in Pakistan that the Americans would leave them alone if the Taliban left American interests in Pakistan alone. That agreement ran for many, many years, right up until just very recently. There was one other point you made. Oh, yes. I think we have to adopt a zero-tolerance policy towards extremism, because we still seem to be frightened of treading on toes. Let's face it, these people are minorities. They've had their problems. They've got problems now. They're not really well accepted in the West and so on. And really, we should let them do their own thing. But we should not. We should not let them preach hatred of our values. We should not let them discriminate against other people and against their own women. We should not let them do that. Muslim women have every single right that I have in Europe. They need to be protected. And we must help the Muslims who are trying to do that as well.
So I guess there's time for one last short question. Good. And the rest of you can try and catch up with Roy during the break.
My name is Cecily, and I have a quick question for you on...
Steiners. John.
I have a question for you on your suggestion to Western governments on limiting the influence of religion on politics, because you said we should call for total secularism, total segregation between state and church. But if you look at countries such as the USA, where there is a supposedly constitutional secularism, you see that there's a lot of religious extremism, including in politics. Whereas a country like Denmark, where we have a national church, you don't really see this sort of very mild version of Christianity. It doesn't really get involved in politics. So I was thinking, if you have a state church where people can sort of satisfy their curiosity towards religion without being incited towards hatred, wouldn't that really sort of limit religious extremism more than allowing all kinds of religious groups with each their different politics and ideas to gain free reign of ordinary people?
I think state churches are a uniformly bad idea. I think all of the evidence we've seen suggests that once you have set in place privilege for any religion, there is pressure to put in place equal and equivalent privileges for other religions. But why religions? Why not philosophical organizations and so on? And you get into a kind of argument about who's getting most of the cake. The only equitable solution is to have complete neutrality in matters of religion and belief. Government should not involve itself in religion, and religions should not expect to have any role in politics other than the fact that their members have a vote. A few years ago, the then UN expert or special rapporteur on freedom of religion or belief said, when I look around the world, there are only two kinds of problem. That's countries where the state owns the religion and countries where religion owns the state. Let's keep them apart. Thank you.